Good morning and welcome to a special virtual edition of SolidWorks Live. Of course, times are a little bit different right now, so we're still bringing you SolidWorks Live in a little bit different of a way. We're all working virtually today. This includes myself in my home office, our production crew. They're located all across the country. And in fact, I'm joined by two of my coworkers here today, Sal Lama and Rob Jost from their home offices as well. Welcome, guys.
Hey, Jeremy.
Hey, so I want to thank you guys for joining me today virtually on SolidWorks Live. We have a lot of cool stuff we want to cover today, but these are some really unique circumstances. I noticed you're both working in rooms in your house and you have some kind of cool stuff going on. Rob, tell us about the posters in the background there.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of horror movies, particularly movies from the 70s or 80s, which I like to call like the glory years of horror. So behind me, you see John Carpenter's Halloween and also The Thing, which is also a Carpenter film. And there's more around the room, but we can save the tour of my house for next time.
Sounds good. So when you're working at home, you're constantly being hovered over by things of people's nightmares, basically.
Yeah. There's nothing more comforting than having Michael Myers stare you down as you're trying to work. So,
very good, Sal. Now yours is a little bit different. You don't have horror themed film. You actually have some pretty unique artwork on the wall behind you, it looks like.
Yeah, I'm hanging out here in my living room today, and behind me there's some artwork by my wife. I know you guys know my wife, Chin Lu. She's a SolidWorks employee, and she's in the user experience group. This is stuff she did many years ago, and it's just something we keep on the living room wall to remind us that you can do cool things if you just spend some time and put pen to paper.
Very cool. So even though we're all working from home, you actually have a team of employees working at your home. Both you and your wife, as you mentioned, work for SolidWorks. So you still get some time around the water cooler, basically, right?
Yeah, it never stops. It's a nonstop. In fact, my poor children, they hear about all kinds of design decisions that happen at the dining room table.
Very cool. So a couple housekeeping notes today. So because of this virtual event, this event is being streamed a little bit differently. We're obviously not in our studio. We also have some streaming limitations. So we are streaming live today on YouTube, if I can do this over here, Facebook and LinkedIn. We will not be streaming on Instagram today due to some technical limitations of how we're streaming virtually. Also, continue to ask questions. We do have people watching the questions, but the best way to ask questions about the things you are seeing here today is to post them in the comments after this video has been streamed. We'll have people who will be able to go back there and answer your questions in the comments. And that brings up an interesting point. This video will be available to watch after this live stream. We have a ton of content to get through here today. This is probably a longer than normal episode. We're going to spend a good portion talking about 3DEXPERIENCE platform and working from home later on. But I want to start out, because of kind of the unique circumstances everyone's going, I want to talk about some new programs that we're running with SolidWorks Live. I then want to go through some tips for using SolidWorks at home. Then, as I mentioned, we're going to get into that 3DEXPERIENCE, kind of the design apps update, a really unique solution to people who are working at home, and then kind of some what's next, both from the 3DEXPERIENCE platform and what we're doing as a company, SolidWorks, to kind of engage with users as we continue forward. So let's go ahead and let's talk about a new program that we've recently launched with a lot of great technical experts at SolidWorks. If you've been subscribed to the SolidWorks YouTube channel, you may have noticed the past few Mondays and Fridays, we've been having live design sessions. This is a new program we're airing called SolidWorks Live Design. And for the foreseeable future, you'll be able to tune in on Mondays and Fridays at 1 p.m. Eastern and you'll be able to engage with some of our technical experts as they go through a design. This is going to be a very interactive process. Just on Monday, we had Andy Barnes going through and creating a snowboard wax iron. This is for applying the wax to your snowboard as you're going through. This was a really cool surfacing example. And as you can see, Andy was able to engage with the audience, provide live tips and tricks on surfacing as he went through there. So make sure you tune into these. So a quick note about this. We've actually had a couple of these already, and they're available on the SOLIDWORKS YouTube channel in a special playlist. You can go back and see the very first episode where we had Toby Schnars walk through a coffee mug design where he showed some really cool modeling techniques, especially focused around lofts and filleting and things like that. Then last Friday, Brian Zaya spent some time talking about design intent. Well, he designed a monitor arm wall mount, and then he continued with his design and showed some really cool sheet metal capabilities. As you just saw, we had Andy Barnes do kind of some surfacing techniques this past Monday where he designed that snowboard wax iron. And this Friday, April 10th at 1 p.m., you can tune in to see Mike Sabocek design a steering pinion shaft for his actual hot rod. So this is a really cool new series. As I mentioned, we're going to be running these for the foreseeable future. Tune in for things like, tips on Model Mania, where we'll have Mark Schneider himself kind of walking through some of his tips and alternative design techniques. I'm going to be doing one of these later for some of the content I've created in the past. So stay tuned to the SOLIDWORKS YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe. And if you hit that bell icon, you'll get notified when these go live. These are really fun, engaging, and interactive pieces to tune into. So one of the other things that we've been getting a lot of questions about recently on social media is using SOLIDWORKS at home. And one of the first challenges users run into is how to handle licensing with their desktop solutions. So as you may know, SOLIDWORKS is very flexible in the many ways that it allows you to license and activate your software. And one of the first things you'll need to figure out is, how do I activate SOLIDWORKS at home? You can log into the SOLIDWORKS customer portal and download the software, but eventually you'll either be asked to log into the software or supply a serial number, and you'll have to deal with activation. So I kind of want to walk through a few of these things and provide some resources for you. One of the first things is in 2018 with SOLIDWORKS, we introduced something called single user activation. If you're using this at your company, this is the easiest way to turn on SOLIDWORKS at home. You simply install the software and log in, and SOLIDWORKS will be ready to run. This is one of the big advantages of single user activation with SOLIDWORKS Desktop, is the ability to work on any computer wherever you might be and not have to worry about the hassles of activation. But let's say you're using the traditional, I enter a serial number and I activate my SOLIDWORKS software. One of the things that you can do is you'll have to access your computer at work, either through hopefully you have your critical IT infrastructure can go through and they can deactivate your individual licenses on your computers. Once that is done, you can then install SOLIDWORKS, enter your serial number, and reactivate it at home. Now, you may be saying, I don't have access to my work computer and we don't have an IT guy that can get in there. Don't worry, we'll cover that in just a minute. One of the other things is a lot of our users use the SOLIDWORKS network licensing. One of the really cool capabilities of SNL is the ability to check out a SOLIDWORKS license. Now, there's a couple ways you can do this. You can have your computer connected to your company's network, and usually this is done through VPN. If you can connect to your company's network through VPN, you can do a license checkout, which doesn't require you to be constantly on their network. You can specify that checkout to be for a specific number of days, and you can continue working there. Again, what if I don't have VPN to access this? Well, finally, you can contact your local SOLIDWORKS reseller and ask them about the special COVID-19 licensing that we've put in place to handle these unique circumstances. As long as you are a SOLIDWORKS customer on subscription, They have a way to get you up and running at home. And we have lots of great resources that'll cover this information in more detail. I'm going to share with you guys a couple of blog articles that'll really cover this. The first one is a great blog article that was written by Mark Johnson at SolidWorks. He's gone through and extensively found all the ways to interact and act with the software. You can find this blog article to navigate your work from home options by going to solidworks.com/work from home. This article really covers all the ins and outs of how to activate your license, the ways I just talked about there, how to connect to your company's network, either through VPN or other methods, and how to even connect with SolidWorks PDM. Another good resource is a blog article from our friends at Engineers Rule. To access this article, you can go to solidworks.com/engineersrule-license. They cover some of the same content, but they really get into the particulars of checking in and out license with the SNL. Finally, if you want to get involved and help your local communities find ways to help combat COVID, we have a community that you can join to share your skills and your engineering knowledge at solidworks.com/COVID community. This is happening all across the world right now. Suchit Jain at SolidWorks is initiated something internally called SolidWorks for Good, where we're really trying to get people involved. You'll find if you go on social media, you may find that your local Fab Labs and maker spaces are also getting involved. I know locally here, the Michigan Lakeshore Fab Lab is actually creating face shields and other PPE to help local businesses meet the supply and demand right now. So these are really cool programs. You can get involved by, again, going to solidworks.com/COVID community and get involved in the fight yourself. So one of the things, we've gone through, we've talked about kind of these unique circumstances, and it goes without saying, working with SolidWorks Desktop, the traditional design tools at home, is going to present some challenges. You're likely going to need something like a VPN connection to be able to connect to your office environment. And whether you're using SolidWorks PDM or a traditional file structure, you're going to need to be connected to access this information. Well, this is actually one of the reasons why we have tools like the 3DEXPERIENCE platform. The 3DEXPERIENCE platform, if you're unfamiliar, is an always connected environment that's available on any device from anywhere. Sal, I wanted to talk to you for a few minutes about, with the circumstances everybody's going through, how can tools like the 3DEXPERIENCE platform help our customers stay connected? And I'm not just talking about the design tools that are available.
Yeah, Jeremy, we'll start with the licensing. You touched on that earlier. In the 3DEXPERIENCE platform, your login credentials are essentially your license. These applications run in a web browser and therefore on any device. And so you simply need to get to a device that can connect to the internet. It doesn't require a VPN. You just log in with your credentials and you're there. You have access to your design tools, but you also have access to all of your collaboration tools. And we'll talk about some of those tools a little bit later, but communities where you can share ideas like the one you showed about COVID-19, and of course your design communities and other things that you use to stay connected with your colleagues.
Yeah, I mean, these tools are really great. A great way to stay connected when you're in an office environment, but when you're disconnected from everybody else, the power that the 3DEXPERIENCE platform offers is really amplified in some of these cases as we go through here. Now, one of the things I thought would be interesting to talk about today, as we're looking at ways of working from home, I thought it would be really cool to talk about the two core design apps that we have right now on the 3DEXPERIENCE platform, both xDesign and xShape. Now, there's something that's really unique about the entire 3DEXPERIENCE platform when it comes to updates. Our SolidWorks Desktop customers are very familiar with our cadence of releasing new features and capabilities. They're used to every October, a new version of SolidWorks Desktop comes out, and they get a whole host of new features. But we handle this and tackle this quite differently when it comes to the 3DEXPERIENCE platform. Correct, Sal?
Yes, in fact, the annual release that you described for SOLIDWORKS Desktop happens multiple times throughout the year for our 3D Experience applications. On the order of 5 times a year, we are releasing new functionality. And it happens in a really awesome cadence where we can bring the functionality that's ready to hit the street to the street multiple times a year. And it's not just the SOLIDWORKS brand and the applications that we'll talk about today, but it's the entirety of Dassault Systems and all of the offerings.
Rob, you've had an opportunity to kind of go through this. You work in product definition, and you're kind of going through and specifying all the new stuff that's coming out. What's this been like for you as you're kind of looking at this new cadence? Because this is different than a whole bunch of new features. These aren't just service packs. These are like featured releases. They're not maybe not as big as like an annual desktop release, but they are significantly more than say a service pack that our customers might be used to. What's that like for you, kind of having to work at this really fast cadence?
Yeah, it's been a big change for me because with SolidWorks Desktop, it's like when it's going to release. Once a year, you have a whole year to get the project done. Now we've gotten into a process where we start planning out, for these 5 releases throughout the year, right? So we'll start developing something, but we're going to have to figure out, okay, we'll release it 3 releases from now, and then these small things can be released in 1 release from now, right? So we also want to make sure that every update we do is jam-packed with awesome stuff. So we kind of want to be able make sure that we can do like an even sprinkle of useful projects throughout every release. So yeah, it's totally changed the way I work.
Cool. So one of the things I thought would be interesting to do today is to take a look at the 2 core 3D modeling apps that our customers are typically looking at on the 3D Experience platform, both xShape and xDesign. So for those at home who aren't familiar with these tools, I'm going to share a bunch of links at the end of this where you can go and learn more about these tools. These are CAD tools that run completely in a web browser. You don't need to install any software. You simply log on to the 3D Experience platform and you can start using these 3D modeling tools. While everybody's kind of working from home right now, I thought it would be cool to show some of the recent introductions to these products in terms of new features to give you kind of an idea of what does this 5 releases a year kind of look like in terms of new functionality. So we're going to look at 4 key areas. We're going to look at the user interface, some of the ways that we're improving the workflows that you may experience. We're then going to dive into some of the enhancements with touch and then kind of combine that with some sketch enhancements. Then we're going to dig into some component, some feature enhancements, as well as I want to talk about component references. When we deal with components on the 3D Experience platform, they're a little bit different than the traditional file system you're probably used to. And then finally, one of my favorite areas we're going to look at, assembly tools. And we're even going to look at some enhancements to external references when we get in there. As we wrap up, we're going to look to the future and some announcements that are going to be happening later on this year. Does this sound like a pretty good schedule of topics to cover, Rob and Sal?
Yep.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I want to dive in. I want to start taking a look at some of the enhancements that we've introduced to the user interface. And these are going to apply to both xDesign and xShape. So let's go ahead and let's start inside of xDesign with this fishing reel assembly that I have here. And let's start looking at some of this stuff. One of the first things you'll notice is I have some sketches and I have some planes that are visible. Well, in the past, to hide these, I'd have to go to the view menu, expand the filters, and then turn those on and off. But what if I'm in a different menu? Well, now with a hotkey V, I can quickly access that menu anywhere. Likewise, I can access the measure tool anywhere by just simply pressing the M key to pull this up. This gives me unprecedented access. Well, there's a whole bunch of new hotkeys that can be found underneath user assistance. Or you can press the F1 hotkey and then go up to user interface and navigate down to keyboard shortcuts. Here you'll see a huge list of new keyboard shortcuts that have been introduced inside of both xDesign and xShape. Depending on whichever app you're running in, you'll be able to see all of those keyboard shortcuts as you go through there. So keyboard shortcuts are pretty fundamental, but you guys have really introduced a whole bunch of new keyboard shortcuts. Rob, tell us a little bit about this and where these are coming from.
Yeah, so Jeremy, it's great. Our apps all run on mobile devices, touch devices, and everything, but we still need to match the expectation of the keyboard user. People are going to be using their desktop to do CAD design still at the end of the day, and it wouldn't be a SOLIDWORKS product if it wasn't jam-packed with all these cool shortcuts, right? So we take that very seriously, and luckily, we have years and years of usage data from all of our users on some of the more popular keyboard shortcuts and more popular commands. So that's what we kind of used as our guiding light to provide this very first round of a bunch of different keyboard shortcuts.
Yeah, I find these extremely useful. Some of the standard view shortcuts that people are probably used to, Control 1 through 7, those are really convenient to access your standard views. The measure key, I just picked a few highlights. So if you're looking for the new keyboard shortcuts, again, press the F1 key to pull up the user assistance menu that's under user interface, and then keyboard shortcuts down below. The next thing we're going to go ahead and dive into here is the action bars. We've completely changed the way you can lay out your user interface. You can now grab any action bar and click it and drag it anywhere you want inside of the user interface. So you can detach these and attach them up at the top. You can add multiple toolbars up, action bars up at the top, and you can even drag action bars on top of one another. This kind of gives you that nested capability. We can go attach some on the right, and you'll notice they're even resizable here so that any more action bars you add will be put on there. Now, if you ever get into a certain space where you've added too many or changed it too much, you can always right-click anywhere on an action bar and choose to reset the positions. Now, I'll point out there are a few things to note here. Your action bar layouts are unique for the app you're running in. So if you're running in xDesign, you'll have a different set of action bars than you might have in, say, xShape. So those layouts will be unique. The other thing, and you'll see this a little bit later, something unique on the 3DEXPERIENCE platform is you can have multiple apps of the same type on a dashboard. You can have customized layouts on each app. So maybe you use one xDesign app for assembly design, and you use another one for component design. Well, you can have different action bar layouts for each of those. Sal, I thought this was really interesting. You're really allowing users to custom tailor this experience. Tell us a little bit about this, kind of how this came about and where we're going with this.
Yeah, the interface, started out with the action bar at the bottom because we felt that that was an appropriate place to put all of your commands. But of course, people like to work with an application the way that they are most comfortable. And so giving people the ability to go and recreate that sort of command manager feel across the top that you find in SOLIDWORKS, or go way back to, say, SOLIDWORKS 97 and put your toolbars everywhere. People like to work the way they like to work, and it builds efficiency into their day-to-day. So we felt it very important to be able to peel these things off and let people design things the way they want to work most comfortably.
Yeah, I'm actually a fan of the action bars down at the bottom there. Another tip users may not be familiar with, one of the things I actually like is you can double click on the tab of an action bar and pin that action bar so that set of tools will always be available no matter what action bar you go into down there. And it's important to note here really quick, I've used the term action bar. This is the same as a toolbar inside of any other application. You'll see that there are some names that are unique to xDesign. For example, we're going to take a look at the Design Manager next. Users are probably familiar with this being called the Feature Manager design tree in SOLIDWORKS Desktop, and here it's the Design Manager. And I actually want to jump in and take a look at something new that we've introduced there. You'll notice we've added a new filter menu here, where you can go in and you can type anything you want, and it'll filter your Design Manager tree down to those specific features and component names that match that. For example, maybe I want to find a feature called extension. I can use this to quickly dive into it and choose to edit that feature right from there. So this is really a convenient way to quickly access those features. The other thing we've done is we've really streamlined and improved the experience in the selection menus within all of our commands. If you've used these tools, you'll notice they look slightly different. The colors on the sides, the chip for the color now matches there on the side with any of those selected entities. You'll also notice that when you need to select entities, it will highlight that you need to select entities from that entity selection. You'll also see the little cancel button next to all of your selections now, where you can quickly and easily remove those. So these are just improved workflows to make your day-to-day interaction with your designs much easier. Rob, it's really interesting. We had a chance to talk earlier. Tell us a little bit about filtering in the Design Manager, and actually some of the reasons we've done what we have done in selection are different than what users might think.
Yeah, so with the Design Manager filter, I mean, you know me, I'm a big surfacing guy, right? So I'm used to very long trees, and nothing is more frustrating when your planes are all hidden and you know there's the one you need, but you're not sure where it is in the tree. To just be able to filter the whole tree by planes or axes or whatever you want, and then quickly be able to find that thing, that's huge. I mean, that's a big productivity enhancement. And I imagine the large assembly folks are going to love it because you're not quite sure where that component is out in the graphics area, right? But you know its part number, and maybe you named it as such or some special name. You can quickly locate that component very quickly. The selection fields, those are great. One of the reasons we did this was for touch, actually, right? So if you look at that selection chip and it has the little X next to it, that's got a bigger kind of pick zone, so to speak, right? So it's much easier to manage your selections within your features on touch devices now. And I don't know if you noticed, but there's also a little three-dot menu, like a little hamburger menu kind of above it. And in there is where you'll find controls to remove all the selections from that input. And it also allows us to put more functionality for future projects that we have and updates that are coming soon.
I noticed you kind of gave a look like maybe there's some cool stuff to look forward to down the road for that. So it's interesting. I use the keyboard and mouse probably more than I use touch, but I still find some of those selection tools useful for me. It allows me to work much more quickly and efficiently inside of the tool as well. So one of the next things I want to look at, and it's something we talk about a lot, and that's app switching. On the 3DEXPERIENCE platform, you can easily switch between xDesign and xShape. Later on in this broadcast, we're going to talk about maybe some new tools coming down the road and the fact that there may be more of these design tools. So we really needed to look at a more efficient way to do this. You've always been able to go up to the compass, double click on an app and activate it. You've also always been able to press the X key to toggle between the two. Well, now we've added an app switch button to the Essentials toolbar, and that X shortcut button now brings up a little dialog where you will be able to select which app you want to go to. This may not seem that important right now, but as we're looking at introducing new X apps to the 3DEXPERIENCE platform, this will become really important to quickly toggle between those. So stay tuned near to the end, and we might have we actually have a cool announcement of something where that's going to be coming later. So I've switched over to xShape. I want to look at some new usability things that we've introduced here. And the first one is we've fully introduced breadcrumbs into xShape. So wherever you select, you'll see the breadcrumbs at the bottom, but you can also press the D key to bring them to your cursor. These work like you would expect, bringing up a quick context menu and even the ability to simply double click on these and start editing whatever that was that we double clicked on. So in this case, we're going to edit the sub D feature. I want to take a look at two more enhancements we've introduced inside of xShape that may seem subtle, but Rob will go into some detail on here in a little bit. The first are some improvements to what's called the robot. Now, when you select geometry, the robot is much more responsive and snaps to the middle of whatever you selected. We've also improved the right mouse click menu to make it easier to readjust the robot, and specifically made it easy to lock the X, Y, and Z, or your kind of world coordinates in place. This makes it easier when you go make another selection in your design. That's always locked and preserved as you go through there. So you're going to find it much easier to work with this robot, which I'm referring to. That's the kind of that reference triad. You'll see that throughout the 3D Experience platform. The other thing we've done here is we've improved both the usability and the performance of insert loops. Now, when you choose to insert a loop, the workflow is a little different. You simply select on the geometry, and then it will present you with the preview, giving you much more instantaneous feedback when you insert those loops as you go through there. So, Rob, we've just covered a whole bunch of stuff, from breadcrumbs to improvements to the robot and some improvements to insert loop. Tell us a little bit about kind of what drove these. The breadcrumbs in particular, I find extremely interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the breadcrumbs, it's solving the same problem as that filter in the design manager, right? Except it's the opposite. You see something in the graphics area, you know that face belongs to a body, and then you want to do something with that body, maybe knit it, combine it. If you select that face, we now can show you the entire hierarchy of that face all the way back out to the top level component, right? And all those nodes and the breadcrumb are all selectable. So you can get all the same commands there. You can right mouse on them and everything and get all the same commands that you would had you picked that thing in the tree. So it's a great shortcut, especially with that D key thing that you showed. Another thing with breadcrumbs also brings to the table is it allows you to completely close the design manager if you want to, right? So think of smaller devices like an iPad or a touch device or something. To have your model in the tree all in the same screen takes up a lot of real estate. Breadcrumbs lets you navigate the tree without really needing the tree, right? Yeah, the robot. So that's a great tool, right? So first thing we did was that right mouse menu that you showed for all those alignment options. Those alignment options used to look and behave a little differently than they did. But as you know, in SOLIDWORKS, we have a long-standing tradition of listening to user feedback and doing lots of testing with users. So a lot of our alpha testers and early adopters gave us more guidance on that kind of menu, and that's why you see the changes you do today, right? Another thing we did was greatly improve the performance of that robot. When it's on the web, it had trouble sometimes recalculating its normals after you do a move or a rotate operation, and it would take about a second to reset, which doesn't seem like a lot, but in the world of modern software, 1 second is 1 second too many, right? So we did a lot of work to make that thing way snappier now. So.
All right. I want to, you had talked about kind of collapsing the design manager as you go through your design, and you referenced touch, and Sal has referenced touch a lot as we've gone through here. Sal, I find it really interesting. You've always talked about touch in a very specific way, and we've done a lot with it since the very beginning. Can you elaborate a little bit on where we are with touch and why it's been so important?
Yeah, we like to walk around the office and say touch first, meaning that should be front of mind. The product definition team has been building SOLIDWORKS functionality for decades now, and it's very easy for us to think about how this stuff should work with a mouse, with a keyboard. But touch is relatively new for us, and so we always try and put that as our first thought process. How is this going to work for someone who doesn't have a mouse or a keyboard? And we'll see some really cool functionality in just a little bit that are examples of what we're doing in that space. We know that our applications need to work on touch devices, on a browser, with just a little tablet UI. So we have to make sure that everything works and is as fluid as it can be with those workflows.
Yeah, you had alluded a little bit to what we're going to be going over. So I created some content here to highlight both some sketch enhancements, but also touch enhancements. And I had to do this on a little tiny iPad mini that I use. This thing is small. This isn't a full-size iPad, and I found it actually pretty easy to work on. So what I was able to do is I was able to broadcast my iPad onto my machine and kind of record this workflow. So Some of these things, you won't see my hands interacting. You'll just all of a sudden see things happen. That's because I'm touching it. So as we dive in, just kind of be aware of that. I'll try to explain this. So we're going to go kind of a little bit slower through some of this touch stuff. So if we take a look at what I have here, if you're unfamiliar with touch, one of the things you'll notice is the icon and the spacing around them have much bigger targets, allowing your fingers a much better way to interact with them. But one of the things you'll see is over on the right-hand side, we have a unique touch toolbar that gives you access to commands that you're usually going to access on a computer. For example, hitting the escape key, multiple selects, so that little hand with a plus icon on it. If you're new to touch, this is the lifesaver button that you need to control or shift select multiple entities at once. This button, this toolbar is now, you can drag this anywhere you want, and you'll notice that it's very responsive. I can drag it around and I can dock it anywhere I want. And I even get a nice little highlight preview of kind of where that's going to snap to my user interface. This is important when you're working on a small device like my tablet or a phone, and you need to work on that area of the screen. You can quickly get that out of the way, move it to another area, and you can move it around without having to have that in your way. So one of the other things that they've recognized with a touch interface is there's a lot of information we provide you through the cursor, through contextual menus. For example, in this here, I've stopped it. I've said I want to start creating a sketch. Well, if I was using a cursor, what would happen? I would get a little icon next to my cursor that would tell me I need to select a plane. If you look at the top center of the graphics area, that icon is now being presented to the user. So they understand and get that same experience that somebody with a mouse cursor would get. You need to select a plane. So let's go ahead, let's go select a plane and start our new sketch. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create some sketch geometry. And what I want to point out before we even get into it is how you can place sketch entities in touch mode. Instead of drawing a line from point to point, you'll notice you can place the line and then you get what's called a sketch hint to adjust it. So let's go ahead and start drawing some lines. I place it and I grab that little ball on the end and I drag it down. You'll notice I can continually draw these sketch entities with these snap targets that appear on the end of these entities, making it very easy while I'm in touch to quickly grab this stuff. You'll also notice that last line I created, it kind of dropped it in place, waiting for me to continually add another line. All I had to do was deselect the line tool and it exited out of that command. This ability to continuously draw sketch entities is really important for creating a lot of profiles. And we've introduced this ability with these target snaps and sketch hints, the way to make this much easier. And this works with lines, lines to arcs, splines. All of these tools now have this continuous sketching kind of mode where you can draw one entity to the next. So I wanted to pause here a little bit before, well, actually, you know what? We're going to draw one more piece of geometry here. I have an arc that I want to create to connect these. So sketch hints, you saw a line where I placed a line, I get an endpoint. An arc is a little bit different. I'm going to go ahead and select the endpoint of the line on the left with the sketch target. I'm going to drag that onto the endpoint of the line on the right. And then I get that sketch hint to adjust the radius on there. So it really walks me through the creation of these sketch entities. Rob, can you take a few moments and kind of talk a little bit about where some of these touch elements came from? Because this is a very different way of looking at sketching geometry.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, when it comes to doing touch and CAD, right? Features, it's a little bit more straightforward. You have a dialogue. You need to make sure that the user can tap things with their finger. But in Sketch, it's trickier, right? Because we rely a lot on hovering, right? So when you're in a sketch, you're hovering to get all your snaps. That's how you invoke inferences for tangency and perpendicular. And also think about the 3-step curve commands, right? Like that 3-point arc is a really good example, right? You place your first 2 endpoints, and then And then defining the radius of the arc is actually based on a hover event, right? Touch users don't have that. So we had to think about ways to help the user along in these situations. So that's where we came up with the idea of these, those manipulators, those hints that you get every time you're in a 3-step feature. So if you were to use slot or ellipse per se, you're going to see more of those, because those commands also require more than just 2 clicks, right?
Yeah, I've actually noticed as I've gone through, I've found it much easier to work on the tablet with some of these new enhancements. It's, I'm a traditional keyboard and mouse kind of person. I found moving to touch to be much easier and productive than, a lot of touch apps that I've used in the past. So these are really good. One of the next things I want to take a look at, so I've kind of done the whole kitchen cooking show, and I've advanced the design a little bit further. So we've taken that sketch, we've extruded it. It's important to note, I've built a series of features on top of this. So I've gone through, I created an extrusion, a thin cut, I've added some fillets to the outside faces, the inside faces, I've added a cut through the middle, and some more. And it's important that I talk about what I've just done right there, because we're going to show some really cool enhancements just to sketches in general, not discrete to the touch environment. But we are going to see a few more things that we can do with touch. So I want to go ahead and edit that sketch that we had just created. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to choose to edit this. Again, I'm still doing this all in touch. There was no reason to really leave this. So we're going to choose to edit this sketch. And then what I want to do is I'm going to draw a new piece of geometry. I'm going to start by creating a construction line that I'm going to reference with touch. But what I really want to create is an ellipse. I want to change the overall shape of this sketch to go from that 3-point arc to be an ellipse. There you just saw those hints again as I'm creating that ellipse. I'm going to go ahead and trim this ellipse up. So what I want is I want to change the overall profile and shape of this. Now, in SOLIDWORKS Desktop, we've actually had something very similar to what we're going to look at here, but we're going to go through this step by step because we've done some really cool and innovative things inside of xDesign to enhance this. So SOLIDWORKS users probably know what I'm going to refer to here. We've introduced the ability through the right mouse click menu. Now, I'm in touch, so right mouse is a little different. What you saw there is I clicked the entity, and the drop-down menu is going to give me everything I would have seen on a right mouse click menu. In the lower left, there's an edit entity. And when I click this icon, we're going to get a pop-up with 4 choices. And we're going to kind of go through what these choices mean, but let's look at the one on the far left. This is replace sketch entity. When I choose this, it's going to prompt me to select another sketch entity to replace the one I had selected with. In this case, the ellipse that I had created. It's then going to present a pop-up giving me the choice if do I want to delete the original sketch entity. I said yes. I could have left it there as a construction entity. Now what's really cool about all this is when I go ahead and I close this sketch, that feature and all the downstream features that were dependent on it all updated with no issues. This is really cool. So Sal, tell us a little bit about this, because this is something that we've seen in SOLIDWORKS Desktop, but I think you had some other feedback or some insight into this tool as well, correct?
Well, yeah, in fact, I'm actually more excited about what you're about to show next. And since this was Rob's specific project, I'll let Rob talk about this for a moment.
Okay, go ahead, Rob.
So yeah, this feature, it's really all about change, right? So as you know, we already have the super feature inside of xDesign, right? You can go between extrude, revolve, and sweep, and that feature also keeps the downstream references on all the faces, right? So this is kind of the natural extension for that into Sketch. We need to be able to make changes to your base geometry and keep those keep all the IDs so that downstream stuff doesn't fail. You know, when we got the chance to design a new CAD system from scratch, we sat back and we said, what are the biggest pain points in a CAD system? You know, parametric history-based modeling is very powerful, but making change is still very painful at times. So we thought of different ways to kind of ease that pain and make it better, and that's what this is.
All right. And you took it a step further even, and we're going to take a look at that now. So replace sketch entity, something I'm familiar with. What I'm going to show next, I was completely blown away by when I saw this for the first time. Let's go in and edit that sketch again here. And this time we're going to take a look at that right menu that showed up in a little bit more detail. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to select the ellipse, and I'm going to again choose that edit entity. And let's look at those other three icons. What's really unique about this isn't the ability to replace a sketch entity, it's to turn this sketch entity into something else. I can turn it into a line, an arc, or a spline. And I'm going to choose to simply convert this over to a spline. You'll see the sketch hint appears that I can touch with my finger and drag that down and get it a little bit close. I can go through there, I hit OK, and again, I can delete that entity. I can even take this further, and I'm going to quickly point out one more thing that we've done with splines, and that's also the ability to add spline points. You can now click anywhere on a spline, choose to add a spline point, and this will give you more control. We've actually always had the ability to create a spline with multiple points and delete them. It's unique that we've actually introduced the ability to add kind of multiple spline points as we go through there. So this is really cool, Rob. You've not only introduced replace sketch entity, but you've actually also gone through and kind of taken it a step further and allowed me to create a new entity from it. Tell us kind of a little bit about that.
Well, it's all about being SolidWorks, right? We said, how can we make it easier and how can we make it faster? If the user doesn't need to sketch in an entity first, then why not have them magically morph that entity into another type? It's that simple.
All right. So these were some great things in terms of user interface and the touch environment that we're used to. What I want to dive into now is I kind of want to look at in assembly, and I want to talk about components and component references and also some enhancements to features. Earlier on, I mentioned kind of a unique way you can lay out your dashboard. You can actually have multiple xDesign apps. So I've got an assembly and two components here. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open up this wheel design here. So we've left the assembly and we've gone to another component. You could think of this even as another user working on this component. So I'm going to show you some feature enhancements, and we're going to come back to that assembly a little bit later. The first thing we're going to take a look at are some enhancements to the loft command. If I edit this loft, we can see that there's an option for control curves on the bottom. And we still have the ability to create guide curves, but we've introduced something new called a spine curve. And with a spine curve, we can select a sketch entity and you can see what happens. The loft tries to follow that selected entity. Now, to select all those entities, I could use tangent propagation to choose them all as we go through there, or I could simply select an entire sketch and it will follow along that. What I want to do is, this might seem subtle, but it's actually somewhat significant. I think it was Sal, you were kind of explaining some of the differences between control curves and spine curves and why this is important. Can you kind of clarify that a little bit?
Yeah, so this project was important to do to continue to give the power that users need to build the geometry that they desire. So a guide curve is a way of you taking the geometry from profile to profile and discretely changing its shape as it transitions from one profile to the next. Whereas a spine curve is really sort of its path along the way. So you can think of it sort of globally, where we're taking a loft and sort of combining it with a sweep and giving you sort of control that you would have in a sweep at the same time as giving you that profile changing that we offer in loft.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for the clarification there kind of as we go through. So when people are working with their designs, keep in mind you have two different ways to kind of control your loft now with these guide curves. You have the control curve and you have the spine curve as you're going through there. So I want to look at something else that people run into a lot in any parametric tool, and that's when you go to delete a feature. When you go to delete in xDesign in the past, when you would delete a feature, you would be prompted, do you want to delete all of the children or none of the children? One of the things we've done is we've introduced the ability to selectively delete any of the features you want. So in this case now, it's not all or nothing. I can go through, selectively choose which features I want to remove, and you'll actually notice that the tree collapses and those features are gone as we go through there. So this is just making it easier for users to kind of interact and work with these features. Now I want to take this a step further. We kind of looked at this with the replace sketch entities, and I want to go a step further. Let's minimize this app and open another xDesign app where I have the center cap. In this design, I have a chamfer and a fillet that were created using tangent propagation, and they kind of follow along based on the selection of this fillet here. Well, what would happen in a design tool if I were to go in and remove those fillets, specifically the one that we had selected that had created the edge that that fillet was created on? This is just asking for trouble in most 3D design tools. This is different than deleting a feature and being prompted. You'll notice what happens here is the fillet and the chamfer actually preserve all the other edges that remain behind. This is a completely different way of thinking about or worrying about the downstream impact of the geometry that you create inside of those sketches and the features you build upon it. Sal, can you talk a little bit about, where this came from, kind of what drove this? Because this is very different than anything I've seen before, the ability to actually delete underlying sketch geometry and not lose any of those references.
Yeah, so, design, we often say, is all about change. And we know that as you're designing, you're going to change your mind 1,000 times before you're done. And often changes can be destructive. And when you make an edit like the one you saw in the video, in most other systems, you would get a red feature tree with all sorts of errors in it that you'd go and have to tend to. We took a different approach here, and we said, okay, the user gave us some information initially when they created that fillet. They said they want the tangent propagation to help them select a bunch of edges instead of manually picking them. Well, in this case, we know all those edges that the user obtained through tangent propagation. And so when those circular edges were deleted, we still had a sense of what all the other edges the user originally wanted. And so we let the fillet succeed with that information.
That's going to really make it much easier to think about the downstream impact of the parametric features that you're creating, for sure. I mean, I've run into this case where you've wanted to delete a sketch entity, but you don't know what's going to happen to it downstream. This takes a lot of that burden off of the end user's shoulders and lets them focus more on the design and less about how they're creating those features and sketches. So it's a really nice enhancement here. I want to go ahead and I want to take this design. I want to go back to that assembly. So let's go ahead and we're going to minimize this app and we're going to go back to our assembly. Now, we've always had the ability in xDesign to update all of our models. What we've done in xDesign is we've introduced that update capability on individual components. So I can go through here now and I can choose just to update the wheel of this design. And you'll notice that the center cap doesn't update when I do this, just the wheel does. Obviously, you can always go through and you can choose to update all of the components if you wanted to, but you now have the ability to selectively choose when and what to update. Now, this is unique because I work in a single user environment a lot. I always want everything to be up to date all the time. Sal, explain to me a little bit the thinking behind this, because it has more to do with the collaborative nature of the 3DEXPERIENCE platform than what some people may think, correct?
Indeed, you nailed it. When you're a single user designing everything, you pretty much want to know everything up to date at all times. It's a no-brainer. But when you're working in a collaborative environment with dozens of people and making a bunch of changes to a large assembly, there are times where you just want to focus on the task that you're trying to accomplish and not be distracted by all the other changes that are going on. So giving the users the ability to have control over what gets updated when was really important. And of course, in addition to that control for seeing only what they want to see, there's going to be performance benefits because they're not asking all sorts of data to be pulled down to update their session.
Very good. And there were some other enhancements. We're not going to go into detail right now, but if people are using some of the revision control management, there were some other enhancements very similar to this. I encourage people who are using those tools to go look into those as well. So we got one more set of enhancements we want to look at. Those were the assembly tools that we're going to dive into here. So we're going to take a look at an assembly of Cryptex that I was actually kind of messing around with, and I thought it would be pretty good to kind of show these off. Working in assemblies is one of my favorite things to do, and some of these new tools are going to make life a lot easier. Now, these things I'm going to show may seem fairly obvious, and we'll go into some of the details on that, why they've come out. And again, we're going to talk about kind of that rapid evolution of new features. One of the first things people want to do is they want to be able to find interferences in their design. And that's what we've done. We've introduced interference detection into xDesign now. And you can see I can quickly find all the interferences in this design. I have several thread engagements that are interfering because the thread diameter is bigger than the tap hole or than the drill diameter. But I did have some interferences specifically between this fixed end cap and this locking key. And what you saw is I actually had the ability there to look at the whole assembly or just specific components. So I want to dive into that a little bit more. I want to look at just those two components. So to do this, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select those two components. And another new enhancement is the ability to now isolate components in xDesign. This is a really convenient way to quickly narrow down and focus in on what you're working on. So Rob, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about this because these kind of seem like pretty obvious features, and you provided a lot of clarification on there's a lot going on with these apps. Can you clarify kind of what you meant by that and like why now?
Right, exactly, Jeremy. You know, these are very obvious features to have in assembly design, and one of the biggest requirements of assembly design is to make sure your components don't interfere with one another, right? However, developing these things sometimes takes time, right? So we can't deliver everything all at once because we need the time to do those things, right? So this is a great example of one of those projects where we're like, okay, we need it in the software now. We have to look several releases down before we can actually release it and plan for that properly. You know, the spline handles is another one, right? We just got the spline point ability. People have asked me, where are the handles, right? The handles take time. So hang in there, and hopefully in a future update, you'll see those.
So I think what this really highlights, though, is the fact, you know, we talked earlier, the 3DEXPERIENCE platform, we see enhancements to these apps, you know, 5 times a year. I don't have to wait until October for a big release of desktop and, you know, like I would with SOLIDWORKS desktop to see, you know, a whole bunch of enhancements. I'm getting new updates all the time. And this is a prime example of this feature is ready. Let's get it out the door. I walked in one Monday morning and there were all my new capabilities, including interference detection and the ability to isolate these components. So I want to fix this problem, and I'm going to do this by editing this end cap here. And what I want to do is I actually want to create a sketch that's going to reference geometry from that key. Not only am I going to start the sketch on one of the faces from it, I'm going to use convert entities to actually select edges off from that component. What I'm doing here is something people are probably familiar with, the concept of creating external references. I'm even going to extrude up to geometry. So I've picked the face 4 edges in this point. One of the things that's unique in xDesign is I can see all my external references at any time. What we've done new in xDesign is we've added the ability to isolate or break those references. This is permanent, so be careful when you do this. But this gives you a lot more flexibility than what we had in the past. It's not either you can create references or not. This is I can create references and then I can go back and I can disable them. Sal, can you provide us a little bit of insight as to why somebody might want to do this, or kind of what drove this workflow as opposed to the either references on or off that we had before?
Yeah, so external references, I think we all understand as being extremely powerful. They're sort of at the core of a parametric system. So when you make a design change, you can trickle your design intent through dozens of other parts. So it's very powerful. It's a polarizing topic, though, because many customers say, I absolutely don't want them. I'm afraid of that power because it could potentially change things that are now out in manufacture or release or what have you. So for the people, however, who recognize that power and want to use them, they often say the same thing later in the design cycle. They say, up front, when I'm being creative, I want to have this very dynamic, easy to change system. But at some point, when I go to manufacture, I need to make sure nothing is changing out of my control. So what we find is that people want to use them, but then they want to turn them off. So this is why this particular command was important to put in. So you can create them up front, and when you're ready, you can disable them, and then be guaranteed that your design won't change without your explicit interaction.
Very good. One of the things here, I was just, we're kind of running short on time, so I was kind of moving this forward. When you're in the isolate command, if you ever want to get out of it, in the upper right-hand corner, there was actually an option to exit isolate. That's where that was. I wanted to quickly talk about one of the things Sal and Rob have both talked about is these updates, these 5 times a year. These aren't just these 3D design tools. It's all across the 3D experience platform. And it's not just tools like xShape and xDesign. Communities, for example, just had an update that Sal really likes. Sal, can you tell us a little bit about, updating the other apps on the 3D experience platform and what some of the other tools that you saw that you like are?
Yeah, in fact, I don't know if you're going to put the screenshot up of the idea funnel, but
Yeah.
inside of the platform, we have the swim communities, and one of the updates there is to the idea funnel, and that's a place where people can go and submit ideas. In fact, we use it internally for a various number of projects, and it's a great way to see what people are telling us. Our territory technical managers, our TTMs, they talk to us about enhancements they want to see in our applications, and we use this cool functionality to track what they've submitted all the way through to when we deliver it. It's just one example of another really cool tool that other brands inside of Dassault are delivering while SOLIDWORKS is hard at work on our design tools.
Yeah, this is the team I work on. We create a lot of the marketing content that you'll see as you go through there. And that's actually how we kind of plan all that stuff. I wanted to take a few minutes because we've been talking about this rapid cadence, about some of the things that are kind of coming next. What can our customers and users and potential users look forward to? Because, we have another update around the corner. I think it's near the end of this month. We're going to see some changes to, like, the whole experience of engaging with a compass is going to change a little bit, but also how our customers interact with our tools is going to change. We're going to be actually releasing, my understanding is Collaborative Designer for SOLIDWORKS is going to be included with 3D Creator and 3D Sculptor. Is that correct, Sal?
Yes, it is. So anytime someone has 3D Creator or 3D Sculptor, they're also going to get that task pane interface that we've seen inside of SOLIDWORKS to allow you to take your SOLIDWORKS data and put it up on the platform. Start working with the apps with one another.
And then, we announced at SOLIDWORKS World some new things that are kind of happening. I think one of the exciting ones is later this year, we're going to be introducing a new design app or a new X app called xSheet. Rob, can you give us a little bit of insight as to like xSheet and kind of how that compares to maybe xShape and what people can expect?
Yeah, it's going to be another app, another X app that runs on the platform or runs on the web. It's going to have a host of sheet metal tools so that you can design sheet metal parts and obtain a flat pattern from that. And of course, it's going to have the same seamless back and forth interop with xDesign and xShape that you see today between xShape and xDesign. So, this is something a lot of our users have told us inside SOLIDWORKS itself, because it's such a big, vast program at this point. They're like, I don't need all this. I only want these tools to do this one specialized thing, kind of a la carte, so to speak, right? So this is another nice tool that can satisfy that requirement.
Yeah, and we briefly touched on it earlier, the app switching capability. You had mentioned, Rob, all these tools work on the same data all the time. And just like I can switch from xDesign to xShape to do sub-D modeling, I'll be able to switch from xDesign to xSheet or xShape to xSheet. You can go anywhere you want. You'll be able to hit that X hotkey. You'll be presented with that pop-up menu, and you'll be able to choose which design app you want to go into. The last thing I want to briefly mention, it was discussed a little bit at 3D Experience World earlier this year as well, and we'll be doing a SolidWorks Live broadcast on this, is later in July, there's going to be a big announcement from SolidWorks on a new product offering as it relates to SolidWorks Desktop and the 3D Experience platform. I can't go into much more detail than that right now, but there's some really exciting stuff. So definitely stay tuned and keep your eyes peeled for something really cool coming down the road. So I want to take a few minutes. Rob, Sal, I want to thank you both for joining me here today from your home offices during these really unique circumstances that we're going through. Thanks for being here. I hope this was fun for both of you.
For sure.
Sure was, yeah.
All right. So a few housekeeping things. If you want to learn more about 3D Creator and 3D Sculptor, which contain xDesign and xShape that we showed extensively today, you can find a free trial where you can go sign up at solidworks.com/try now. If you want to learn about even more of the really cool transformative features that are in these tools, like we had talked about super features, there's this really cool thing called single modeling environment. There's a bunch of tools for data management. You can go to solidworks.com/transform to learn more about those cool capabilities. And finally, if you just want training and you want to understand how to use the tools, you can go to solidworks.com/3dx-training to learn more. Now, we have a lot going on with SolidWorks Live. I mentioned early on in the broadcast, we are going to have SolidWorks Live Design again this Friday at 1 p.m. with Mike Sabocek, where he's going to be designing a steering pinion shaft for his own custom hot rod. And we're going to be doing those live designs every Monday and Friday at 1 p.m. So make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube and click that bell icon if you want to see great technical experts from across our technical team show you guys and engage with you how to create really cool stuff. Also, SolidWorks Live. We're already planning our next SolidWorks Live. It'll probably be another virtual event. It's going to be on May 15th. The future of design is collaborative. This is going to be a really cool opportunity where we're going to engage with a customer doing some really cool stuff with SolidWorks. I want to take a moment and thank everybody for tuning in today to our special virtual SolidWorks Live event. I hope everybody at home is staying safe and staying healthy. And make sure you stay tuned to us on all of our channels on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and live.solidworks.com. And until the next time, we'll see you later. And again, stay safe, stay healthy.
Bye, everyone.